It's time to talk about Assassin's Creed again, to look at that new Viking game that we're likely getting in 2020, codenamed Kingdom, and maybe Ragnarok is the official title. We now got new rumors from someone who could totally be in the know, and there was also a retailer who, weirdly enough, leaked a release date that could be true. So let's get into it. A like on the video would of course be super appreciated. And let's go. Let's start with Luke Stevens, who posted a pretty long video on rumors regarding the next Assassin's Creed, and maybe you know his content. He did some pretty big videos before on the series, for example where he noted that we take Assassin's Creed for granted, or that Odyssey proves something incredible. So now he talks about real and fake leaks regarding the next Assassin's Creed, and he says that people that are familiar with the game send him stuff because they like his content. And again, I can totally see why looking at those previous videos. So he believes that most of it is true, and a lot of it is actually similar to that big rumor we discussed in my previous video. So that also makes me think that there could be some truth to this. I will of course leave a link to Luke Stevens' video in the video description for if you want to check it out, but these are the things from that video that stood out to me. If you think Vikings, then you think heavy weapons, and Luke also says that there will be a big emphasis on great swords, heavy axes and maces, and that shields, as we already discussed before, are coming back, and that overall you could say that the combat is more tactical. Like slower than, for example, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Because in that game they of course took the shield away because they wanted a more aggressive approach. So from the sounds of it, the combat will be more like Origins compared to Odyssey, and that of course makes sense because the game is being made by the Origins team. Large scale battles and Vikings make of course a ton of sense, so we should expect castle raids in this next game. And Luke Stevens compares it to Shadow of War, and if you followed the channel for a while then you know that I really liked that game and really enjoyed covering it here when it came out in October 2017, like actually just before Origins. So in that game you had to attack forts and castles, and you actually also had companions who could help you out in these large scale battles, where inside the castle you needed to capture points, and if you got all the points then you could fight the boss inside the castle, and if you won then you took over like the whole fort. Well, looks like Ubisoft is looking at a system like this to give you that Viking raid feel, and rumors already suggested that we would also be able to defend those castles and forts that we took over. And that was actually the case in Shadow of War as well. At some point the enemies would attack and then you had to defend, otherwise you would lose that region again. And it totally makes sense for the Viking era, and this is also where, according to Luke, the recruitment system comes in. He namely notes that this would be kind of similar to Watch Dogs Legion, so likely not that we can of course play all these characters, but that these companions do have certain characteristics or traits that make them stand out. So just a more in-depth system compared to what we saw in Odyssey, where the lieutenants only had some perks. So the idea is that because they spent a ton of money on this innovative system for Watch Dogs Legion, they also want to use it for their other games, including the next Assassin's Creed. Something that I feel makes sense and would totally fit these large-scale battles if you could bring your own soldiers that you recruited too. Something that we actually saw in Shadow of War as well. But if this is true, then it will likely not be as deep as we see in Watch Dogs Legion, because that game is set to launch in the second half of 2020, just like this next Assassin's Creed. And they're already quite similar in terms of open world Ubisoft third-person action games. So if they then also share kind of the same systems, then it could hurt one another, and we will see a good example of that a little later in the video as well. It's pretty interesting. But first I want to touch on a release date leak from a German retailer. They noted that Assassin's Creed Ragnarok would launch on September 29th, 2020. And German YouTuber Fragnart sent this to me. Totally check him out if you are German. I put a link to his channel in the video description. And I went to this gamesonly.et website as well and saw the listing too before they removed it. Like, it's not on the website anymore, and that already makes it pretty interesting. And also September 29th, 2020 is a Tuesday, and Ubisoft likes to launch their big holiday games now in the first few days of October, like around that time. We saw it this year with Breakpoint and last year with Odyssey. Those titles had early access on Tuesday and then a worldwide launch on Friday of that same week. You should always take retail leaks, especially with a grain of salt, but I still thought it was interesting to share because it could make sense and it has been removed now. Let's go back to Luke and continue with some exciting stuff. Because the free roaming system should see a ton of improvements, especially since we will be in a lot of forest areas in Scandinavia. So according to Luke Stevens, they want to improve how we traverse those types of landscapes. They will actually want to climb in the trees instead of run on the ground. It should be kind of comparable to the overhaul to the parkour system that we saw in Assassin's Creed 3. And there should be more reasons to spend time in these woods. In Odyssey and Origins, we would mostly just go from waypoint to waypoint or look for a specific area in the exploration mode, but there was no real reason to interact with the wildlife, for example, if you did not need to kill them for a specific quest. Well, according to Luke Stevens and his sources, this game should put more focus on hunting and gathering. So maybe that we need to take out specific creatures for upgrades or to craft arrows or anything. Red Dead Redemption 2 did some next level hunting, like where you really had to come prepared to take out special animals, that you had to use specific traps to catch them for that inventory upgrade. Like, I don't need a hardcore system like that, because it was pretty frustrating at times if you were looking for one specific animal that would simply not spawn, but they could totally improve on this aspect looking at Origins and Odyssey, for example, where it was just there. You could hunt them, you got some resources, but that was really it. So hopefully Ragnarok takes that to the next level. And this next part that Luke Stevens discusses in his video are very interesting. He namely notes that Ubisoft is trying to give you multiple ways to play the game to in the end get to the same sort of max level or end game. So the example that Steven gives is that you could, for example, be someone who likes to hunt or gather things and just want to do that all the time. And then you could still come as far as someone who wants to follow the main story and just do all the narrative content. Right now, in previous games, you were in the end forced in one direction. Like in Odyssey, I really love to do the bounties and just do some conquest battles to level up fast. But in the end, I still had to go back to the same main missions to advance the story and get to certain cultists or places in the game that I could not go to if I did not follow those missions. And okay, I'm not sure if that is specifically what they're going for, but overall, like, more freedom in open world games, that all the different activities in the game are as rewarding, like give you the same XP, so you can really just do what you love in the game and get the same amount of points. Very interesting. I'm curious if they will do something like this, and if they do, how they will execute on it. But if this is part of the next AC, then I totally expect a lot of marketing to focus on this, like freedom, choose your own adventure in this Viking world, etc, etc. Naval is part of this game, but as we discussed in my previous video, it's not as vibrant as in Odyssey. It's purely for exploration or separate naval battles, like we saw in Origins, where it would just be part of a mission. So you would just teleport on a ship, then you had a naval battle, and then you would teleport to the world again. And I love this part of Luke's video because he notes that the reason why they kind of removed the Odyssey Naval stuff from this next Assassin's Creed is because of Skull and Bones. Not sure if you remember this naval ship battle game. It was first only a competitive ship battle game where you could also not leave the ship. But now we actually know that it also has a PvE mode, a campaign. It's likely way bigger than they first envisioned. It sounds more like Sea of Thieves now, but with more realistic graphics. So this game was first planned for 2020 after being delayed multiple times. Now it has actually been delayed one more time again to 2021. But yeah, during the development of this Viking Assassin's Creed, the idea would always be to likely release both titles close to each other. So Ubisoft was afraid that players would not see a distinction between the two games. Like, why would I buy a game about ship battles and naval combat while I can also do that in the new Assassin's Creed and do much more in that new Assassin's Creed? And the reasoning behind this really sounds like Ubisoft, and also not something that I think Luke could have made up. Maybe you remember the news after the disappointing sales of Ghost Recon Breakpoint, where Ubisoft gave 3 key reasons why the game failed, and one of them was that Ghost Recon Breakpoint did not come in with enough differentiation factors, which prevented the game's intrinsic qualities from standing out. And around that time, Jason Schreier reported that inside the Ubisoft teams, the sort of leaders had to come to the higher-ups and say what made their game unique. Ubisoft seems to be really afraid of that every Ubisoft game is the same critique, so they want to combat that, and changing the naval in Assassin's Creed could be a part of that, because again, otherwise Skull and Bones might be less appealing. Very interesting stuff, and I can totally see Ubisoft do something like this. At this point though, I just want to see the game, and I really hope that that February reveal date that we also discussed in previous videos is true, because that means that we're close. Luke Stevens, by the way, also says that he believes it's going to happen in February, that it might occur during a Sony State of Play, or maybe a PlayStation 5 reveal event. That could also happen around that time, as we saw with the PlayStation 4. Sony's strategy going into the next gen is also making deals with AAA third-party games, and Assassin's Creed could totally be one of them, meaning that you then see a PlayStation at the end of every commercial and maybe some exclusive content. And yes, as I said before, I think Xbox is a great fit too. It's kind of hard to say what the future holds at this point. What we at least know is that the game is scheduled for holiday 2020, so alongside the launch of the next-gen systems like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, but it will also release on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One and PC. When we know more rumors, rumblings, or hopefully official info, then I will of course let you know here on the channel. So totally subscribe for everything Assassin's Creed if you haven't already. Like this video to support the channel, and if you want early access to every big Sunday video that I release here on the channel, then you want to become a member by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button. Because then you can watch this video 2 days early and without any ads. And it of course supports me a lot, so I can hire an editor who's working on this video too. For now, I will speak to you next time. Check out my previous video on Assassin's Creed Ragnarok by clicking on the screen, and goodbye.